Museums have one job. One, tell the truth. And somehow, the biggest, most prestigious institutions on the planet have been caught displaying straight-up fakes, hoaxes, and lies for decades, sometimes centuries. We are talking about the Louvre, the Smithsonian, the British Museum, places that charge you money to look at things that are about as authentic as a $3 bill. These are 33 artifacts that fooled experts, fooled millions of visitors, and some of them are still sitting behind glass right now, pretending to be real. 1. If you have ever seen a chastity belt in a medieval exhibit, you were probably told that knights locked up their wives before riding off to the Crusades. Noble warriors, sacred honor, big padlock. Very dramatic, also very fake. Historians have found zero evidence that chastity belts existed in the Middle Ages. The earliest references to them were literal jokes in satirical books. The actual belts you see in museums were manufactured in the 18th and 19th centuries, mostly as curiosity items or, and I love this part, for the early fetish market. So that artifact labeled medieval chastity belt, circa 1200, is really more like Victorian adult novelty item, circa 1850. And museums knew this for decades. Many just never bothered to update the label because, honestly, kinky Victorians does not sound as educational. 2. In 1917, a geologist found a single tooth in Nebraska and sent it to Henry Fairfield Osborn, head of the American Museum of Natural History. Osborn examined this one tooth and declared it belonged to an unknown species of ancient ape man, the first evidence of early humans in North America. He named it Hesperopithecus. The press called it Nebraska Man. An artist drew a full body. They gave him a wife. They put them in a landscape and published it in a major newspaper, all from one tooth. Then in 1927, more fossils turned up at the same site. And surprise, the tooth belonged to a peccary. That is a type of wild pig. So the museum built an entire prehistoric human species, complete with a family portrait, based on a pig tooth. Somewhere out there, a peccary deserved royalties. 3. In 1896, the Louvre paid 200,000 francs for a golden tiara supposedly gifted to the Scythian king Saitaphernes in the 3rd century before Christ. They displayed it with enormous pride. Almost immediately, scholars said the inscriptions looked wrong. The design was too clean, and there was no aging you would expect on something that old. The Louvre ignored them for years. Then in 1903, a goldsmith from Odessa named Israel Rauchamovsky showed up in Paris and said, "Yeah, I made that." He had crafted the entire thing in his workshop just before it was sold. He even offered to make another one on the spot to prove it. The Louvre had to quietly remove their prized artifact. Rauchamovsky was never charged with anything because he never claimed it was ancient. He just made a really nice tiara, and other people lied about it. Honestly, give the man a medal. 4. For centuries, churches and early museums across Europe displayed enormous bones on their walls, claiming they belonged to biblical giants. Goliath, the Nephilim, you name it. Visitors stared up in awe, imagining towering warriors from Scripture. When scientists finally examined these relics, they turned out to be bones of whales, mammoths, and woolly rhinoceroses. One famous set of giant bones at Wawel Cathedral in Krakow belonged to a mammoth and a whale. So for hundreds of years, people were lighting candles and praying beneath the ribs of a dead marine mammal, convinced it was a fallen warrior from the Book of Genesis. Some of these bones are still hanging there, which means a whale is technically receiving more prayers than most saints. 5. In 1725, a professor named Johann Beringer at the University of Würzburg was obsessed with finding fossils. His colleagues, Roderick and von Eckhart, thought he was arrogant and decided to destroy him in the most creative way possible. They carved fake fossils into limestone, depicting lizards, birds, spiders, and even Hebrew letters spelling out the name of God, then planted them for Beringer to find. Beringer was thrilled. He published an entire book about these miraculous discoveries. Then he reportedly found a stone with his own name carved on it. The realization must have hit like a freight train. He tried to buy back every copy of his book, which naturally made the scandal worse. The stones became known as the lying stones and are still displayed in museums today, not as fossils, but as monuments to the greatest academic prank ever pulled. 6. Every year, hundreds of thousands of tourists pay real money to visit Juliet's tomb in Verona. They stand in a dimly lit crypt, gazing at a stone sarcophagus, some of them actually crying over the tragic love story. Here is the thing. Romeo and Juliet are fictional characters. They never existed. Shakespeare based his play on a poem, which was based on an older story, none of which described real people. And the tomb itself? Historians believe it is an old stone trough used for watering livestock or washing clothes. The city of Verona took a medieval laundry basin, stuck it in a basement, and turned it into a romantic pilgrimage site. They have been doing this since the 18th century, and nobody cares because the tourist money keeps flowing. Love conquers historical accuracy, apparently. 7. In 1999, National Geographic announced they had found the missing link between dinosaurs and birds. A spectacular fossil from China called Archaeoraptor, showing a creature with a dinosaur body and bird wings. It made the magazine cover. Museums scrambled for replicas. Then scientists discovered that a Chinese farmer had taken the tail of one dinosaur fossil and the upper body of a completely different bird fossil, glued them together, and sold the combo to a dealer. The two halves did not even come from the same geological period. National Geographic had to publish one of the most embarrassing retractions in magazine history. The farmer made a nice profit, though. Entrepreneurship at its finest. 8. Close your eyes and picture a Viking. Big bearded guy in a horned helmet, right? Completely wrong. Real Vikings never wore horned helmets. The only authentic Viking helmet ever found, the Geirmundbu helmet from Norway, is a plain iron dome with a nose guard. 0 horns. So where did the horns come from? A costume designer named Carl Emil Doppler, who in 1876 created horned helmets for a production of Wagner's opera, The Ring of the Nibelung. Doppler thought they looked dramatic on stage, and the image permanently infected the public imagination. One costume designer's artistic choice in a 19th century opera rewrote how the entire world pictures an entire civilization. Some regional museums still label random horned helmets as Viking, because apparently correcting a 150-year-old opera costume mistake is too much effort. 9. In certain European museums and old curiosity cabinets, you can find small dried creatures that look like tiny winged demons or sea dragons. For centuries, sailors sold these at ports for huge sums, swearing they pulled them from the deep ocean. Proof that sea monsters were real. In reality, they are Jenny Hanivers, nothing more than dried carcasses of rays and skates that have been carved and bent while still wet to look like fantastical creatures. The underside of a ray already looks vaguely like a creepy little face, so it does not take much creative mutilation to turn it into a nightmare. The name likely comes from a corruption of French words meaning young woman of Antwerp, where these things were basically mass-produced for gullible tourists. Some museums still display them today, though now with considerably more honest labels. 10. The Mozarteum Foundation in Salzburg had a skull in a glass case for over 100 years, labeled as the skull of Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. Visitors from around the globe made pilgrimages to stare at the cranium of the greatest musical genius in history. The skull supposedly was rescued from Mozart's unmarked pauper's grave by a gravedigger and passed through various hands before arriving at the Mozarteum in 1902. Then in 2006, scientists ran DNA tests, comparing the skull to DNA from Mozart's known maternal relatives buried in Salzburg. The result: not a match. Not even close. It was just some random person's skull that had been touring Vienna for 2 centuries, collecting admiration it absolutely did not earn. The Mozarteum still has the skull. They just do not make the same bold claims about it anymore. 11. In 1961, 3 rock collectors cracked open a geode near Olancha, California, and found what appeared to be a metallic cylinder with a ceramic casing inside natural rock. The surrounding material supposedly dated back 500,000 years. Ancient alien enthusiasts lost their minds. Museums for paranormal fans displayed it as one of the greatest mysteries of all time. Then, the spark plug collectors of America got involved. Yes, that is a real organization. They took one look at the X-rays and said, that is a 1920s Champion spark plug from a Ford Model T. It had simply corroded and become encrusted with minerals over a few decades, which made it look ancient. The 500,000-year-old mystery was about 40 years old. A car part. The ancient alien artifact was a car part. 12. Starting in 1915, the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York acquired 3 massive Etruscan terracotta warrior statues, supposedly from the 5th century before Christ. For 28 years, they stood in the Met's galleries as masterpieces of ancient art. Experts wrote papers. Students studied them. They were considered among the finest Etruscan sculptures ever found. Then it all collapsed. The statues had been created in the early 1900s by a group of Italian forgers who copied elements from genuine ancient pieces in other museums. The final proof came when one of the forgers casually recreated a missing thumb that fit perfectly onto one of the warriors. 28 years of scholarly papers, and all it took was an Italian guy saying, "Watch this," with a lump of clay. 13. Every medieval torture museum in Europe has an Iron Maiden. That terrifying human-shaped cabinet lined with spikes, designed to slowly impale whoever was placed inside. Horrifying, iconic, and almost entirely invented. There is no credible evidence Iron Maidens were ever used as torture devices in the Middle Ages. The first one appeared in the late 18th century, assembled by a showman in Nuremberg who cobbled it together from old artifacts and added spikes himself. It was built to attract paying visitors who wanted to be horrified by the barbaric Middle Ages. Every Iron Maiden in existence is either a reproduction or a 19th century tourist trap. The real medieval people, who definitely did terrible things to each other, would look at an Iron Maiden and say, "What is that? Never seen one." 14. For over 50 years, museums depicted Neanderthals as hunched-over, knuckle-dragging brutes who shuffled through caves like caveman zombies. This portrayal was based on a single skeleton found at La Chapelle aux Saints in France in 1908. A paleontologist named Marcelin Boule reconstructed it as a stooped, slouching creature that could barely walk upright, and every museum in the world copied his work. Much later, scientists realized the La Chapelle skeleton belonged to an elderly individual with severe osteoarthritis. His spine was curved because he had a painful degenerative disease, not because Neanderthals were built that way. We spent half a century mocking our closest evolutionary relatives because one scientist built an entire species profile around a sick old man with bad joints. Neanderthals actually stood upright. We owe them an apology. 15. When the Museum of the Bible opened in Washington in 2017, one of its biggest attractions was 16 fragments of the Dead Sea Scrolls, some of the most important religious documents in history. The museum spent millions acquiring them. In 2018, German scientists determined 5 fragments were forgeries. The museum quietly removed them. More tests followed. More bad news? Then in March 2020, the devastating announcement: all 16 fragments were fakes. Every single one. Forgers had taken ancient pieces of blank leather, likely from old shoe soles, and written text on them using techniques designed to mimic ancient ink. The Museum of the Bible built a marquee exhibit around 16 pieces of very expensive decorated shoe leather. Millions of dollars for footwear. 16. Most people know about the Piltdown Man hoax. Fewer know about the Piltdown cricket bat. When the fake skull fragments were being discovered at the Piltdown gravel pit in the early 1910s, someone also planted a piece of fossilized elephant bone carved into a shape that looks exactly like a cricket bat. Scientists examined it with completely straight faces and described it in academic papers as a primitive bone implement and an early tool crafted by ancient humans. Nobody seemed to notice it looked exactly like sporting equipment for a game that ancient hominids famously did not play. The hoaxer was clearly testing how far they could push scientific gullibility. Turns out, pretty far. You could probably have planted a fossilized tennis racket, and someone would have written a thesis about it. 17. The story of Lincoln being born in a log cabin is one of America's favorite origin stories, so naturally people wanted to see the actual cabin. In 1894, a New York businessman named Alfred Dennett bought the Kentucky farm, found some old logs that local tradition connected to Lincoln, built a structure, and started charging admission. Then he took the cabin on tour across America, making money at every stop. Here is where it gets beautiful. At one point, the Lincoln cabin logs were stored alongside logs from a cabin associated with Jefferson Davis, the President of the Confederacy. During transit, the logs got mixed together. Nobody could tell which were which. So the Lincoln birthplace that was enshrined in a grand marble memorial in 1911 almost certainly contains logs from the childhood home of his greatest political enemy. The man who saved the Union might have been born in the house of the man who tried to destroy it. 18. In 1909, Wilhelm von Bode, director of the Kaiser Friedrich Museum in Berlin, purchased a wax bust of the goddess Flora and declared it a lost masterpiece by Leonardo da Vinci. Berlin celebrated. The press went wild. Then a British man named Albert Lucas came forward and said his father, a 19th century sculptor named Richard Cockle Lucas, made the bust around 1860. Bode refused to believe it and defended his Leonardo until his death. Modern scientific analysis confirmed what the Lucas family had been saying all along. The wax contained spermaceti, a substance from sperm whales commonly used in 19th century modeling but never in Renaissance sculpture. The Leonardo was about 350 years too young. Bode essentially paid for a Victorian craft project and called it Renaissance genius. 19. In the 1960s, a Peruvian farmer named Basilio Uchuya started selling stones covered in elaborate engravings showing humans riding dinosaurs, performing heart surgery, and using telescopes. A local doctor named Javier Cabrera became obsessed, collected over 15,000 of them, and opened a museum declaring them proof that an advanced civilization coexisted with dinosaurs. Some fringe museums displayed Ica stones as genuine artifacts. Then journalists tracked down Uchuya and asked him directly. He admitted he carved them himself using a dental drill, basing his dinosaur designs on pictures from magazines and comic books. He said he could make about 3 a day and selling them was easier than farming. The guy literally showed reporters his technique on camera. Some believers still insist the stones are real, which tells you everything you need to know about the power of wanting something to be true. 20. During 19th century Egyptomania, the British Museum was desperate for impressive Egyptian artifacts. When they acquired a beautifully decorated female mummy in an ornate coffin, someone at the museum slapped a label on it reading Cleopatra. Not because there was any evidence connecting it to the actual Cleopatra VII, but because the coffin was pretty enough, and Cleopatra was a name that sold tickets. The real Cleopatra's tomb has never been found. This mummy was probably just a wealthy woman from Roman-era Egypt who had zero connection to royalty. But for decades, Victorian visitors believed they were gazing at the woman who seduced Caesar and Antony. The museum eventually corrected the label, but not before generations went home with a completely fabricated memory. Marketing has always been marketing, even in the 1800s. 21. Visit certain creationist exhibits, and you will find pieces of old wood displayed as fragments of Noah's Ark recovered from Mount Ararat in Turkey. Multiple expeditions have claimed to find wooden structures on the mountain, offering them as proof the biblical flood literally happened. One problem. When scientists tested these wood samples using radiocarbon dating, the wood consistently dated to medieval periods, roughly 700 to 1200 years old, not the 5,000 plus years you would need for a biblical vessel. The most likely explanation is that these are remains of shelters built by monks and pilgrims who climbed the mountain over the centuries. So the proof of the greatest boat ever built turned out to be bits of a medieval mountain hut. Still a nice cabin, though. 22. Megalodon teeth are some of the most popular items in natural history museums. Those massive serrated teeth from the largest shark ever are genuinely impressive. But here is a dirty little secret. A huge number of Megalodon teeth on display, especially the spectacular ones with perfectly intact roots, have been partially faked. The tooth enamel is real, but the root, which usually crumbles away over millions of years, has been rebuilt using autobody filler, epoxy, or modeling putty. Some restorations are disclosed, many are not. Real Megalodon teeth are already incredible without help. They can be over 6 inches long and are genuinely millions of years old. But someone decided that a 60-million-year-old shark tooth needed cosmetic surgery from a hardware store to really shine. 23. In 1985, the Getty Museum in Los Angeles paid around $10 million for a marble statue of a Greek youth, called a kouros, supposedly from around 530 before Christ. Scientific tests seemed fine, but art historians immediately raised alarms. The statue's style combined elements from different periods that do not normally appear together, like someone used a textbook to create a greatest hits of archaic Greek sculpture. The debate raged for decades. The Getty could never reach a conclusion, so for years the museum label read, Greek, about 530 BC, or modern forgery. That might be the most brutally honest museum label ever written. Imagine paying $10 million for something and telling visitors you have no idea if it is real. The Getty eventually removed the kouros, essentially conceding it was probably fake. $10 million for a probably. 24. In October 1869, workers digging a well in Cardiff, New York, hit something hard 3 feet underground. They unearthed what appeared to be a petrified human body over 10 feet tall. Thousands traveled to see the Cardiff giant at 50 cents a head. Preachers called it proof of biblical giants. Scientists debated whether it was a petrified man or an ancient statue. It was neither. A cigar manufacturer named George Hull had paid sculptors to carve it from gypsum, then buried it on his relative's farm a year earlier. Hull was an atheist who wanted to prove people would believe anything confirming their existing beliefs. He was spectacularly right. Even after he confessed, people refused to accept it was fake. P.T. Barnum made his own copy and displayed it, claiming his was the real one. So America ended up with 2 fake giants competing for ticket sales. Peak America. 25. In the Cathedral of San Lorenzo in Genoa sits a hexagonal bowl of brilliant green material venerated for nearly 1,000 years as the Holy Grail. The actual cup Jesus supposedly drank from at the Last Supper. The Genoese claimed it was carved from a single massive emerald, captured during the Crusades in 1101. Pilgrims traveled from across Europe to see it. Then Napoleon showed up. French forces confiscated the Sacro Catino and shipped it to Paris for study. French scientists examined it and delivered the verdict: not an emerald, green glass. Beautiful Roman-era glass, probably 1st or 2nd century, but glass. When the bowl was returned to Genoa, it came back broken, and the Genoese were furious. They still display it, but the whole Holy Grail carved from a giant emerald pitch lost some of its magic. Napoleon broke the Grail and the illusion in one trip. 26. For 40 years, from 1912 to 1953, the Natural History Museum in London displayed Piltdown Man as the missing link between apes and humans. The skull had a modern-looking brain case with a primitive ape-like jaw. Textbooks were rewritten. Other genuine discoveries were dismissed because they did not fit the Piltdown model. Then, in 1953, scientists used fluorine dating and discovered the truth. The skull was from a modern human, probably medieval. The jaw was from an orangutan. The teeth had been filed down to look human, and the bones stained with chemicals to look ancient. Someone literally glued a human skull to an ape jaw and fooled the entire scientific establishment for 4 decades. 40 years. That is longer than most marriages and about as based on deception as the worst ones. 27. In the National Museum of Anthropology in Mexico City sits the Stone of Tizoc, a massive carved Aztec cylinder. For decades, guides and labels described a shallow groove on its surface as a channel carved by Aztec priests to drain the blood of human sacrificial victims. Visitors shuddered on cue. Historians eventually discovered the groove was not cut by any Aztec priest. It was carved in the 18th century by a colonial-era farmer who found the stone and tried to turn it into a millstone for grinding grain. He took one of the most important archaeological artifacts in Mexican history and tried to make it into farm equipment. So that blood channel that gave visitors chills was actually just the mark of a farmer who needed a new way to grind corn. Significantly less terrifying. 28. The Roman baths in the city of Bath, England, are one of the most popular tourist destinations in the entire country. Visitors walk around the ancient bathing complex, marvel at the steaming green water, and snap photos of the dramatic statues of Roman emperors and governors that line the upper terrace overlooking the Great Bath. These statues look fantastic. Toga-draped figures staring imperiously down at the pool, exactly as you would imagine Roman dignitaries posing above their luxurious spa. The only problem is that these statues are about as Roman as fish and chips. They were carved in 1894 during a major Victorian-era renovation of the site. Victorian designers decided that the ancient baths needed some Roman-looking decoration to really sell the atmosphere, so they commissioned brand new statues and placed them around the terrace. The actual Roman ruins are below and around the baths, but those photogenic emperors towering over the pool are solidly Victorian. Most visitors have no idea, and honestly, the statues do look pretty convincing, but they are younger than some of the plumbing in your house. 29. In 1885, a worker at an iron foundry near Wolfsegg, am Hausruck in Austria, cracked open a block of coal and found something extraordinary inside. It was a roughly cube-shaped iron object with a deep groove running around its center. The coal seam it came from was estimated to be around 60 million years old. If this was a manufactured object, it meant that some intelligent being had made it tens of millions of years before humans existed. The Salzburg Cube, as it became known, was displayed in museums and became a star exhibit for people who believed in ancient advanced civilizations or extraterrestrial visitors. Fringe theorists wrote entire books about it. The truth is considerably more boring. Analysis of the metal showed it was consistent with cast iron, and experts eventually concluded that the most likely explanation was that it was a counterweight or ballast from mining equipment that fell into the coal deposit during extraction work. Coal can accumulate mineral deposits around foreign objects relatively quickly in the right conditions. So the impossible ancient artifact was almost certainly a piece of industrial equipment that got lost in a coal mine a few decades before someone found it. 30. For decades, Yale University proudly displayed a map that, if authentic, would have been one of the most important documents in cartographic history. The Vinland map appeared to be a 15th-century world map showing the coastline of North America, labeled Vinelanda Insula, decades before Columbus sailed. It would have been definitive proof that Europeans knew about the New World before 1492. Yale acquired the map in 1965 and published it with great fanfare. But almost immediately, doubts emerged. In the 1970s, a researcher named Walter McCrone analyzed the ink and found it contained titanium dioxide in a form called anatase, a synthetic pigment that was not manufactured until the 1920s. That is a pretty big problem for a supposedly 15th century document. Yale fought the findings for years, commissioning counter-studies and clinging to the possibility that the map was genuine. But the evidence kept stacking up against it. In 2021, Yale finally acknowledged what most experts had been saying for decades. The Vinland map was a 20th century forgery. The map that was supposed to rewrite the history of exploration was younger than some of the professors who studied it. 31. For over a century, crystal skulls have captivated the public imagination. These life-sized skulls carved from clear or milky quartz were presented as sacred artifacts of ancient Mesoamerican civilizations, particularly the Aztecs and the Maya. The British Museum acquired one in 1897. The Smithsonian received one in 1992. Both institutions displayed them as genuine pre-Columbian artifacts, and the skulls became the subject of wild theories about mystical powers, alien technology, and ancient curses. Then scientists decided to actually examine them. Using electron microscopes, researchers found tool marks on the crystal surfaces that were consistent with modern rotary cutting tools, specifically jewelers' wheels that did not exist in pre-Columbian America. The marks were too uniform and precise to have been made with ancient hand tools. Further investigation traced many of the skulls back to a 19th century French antiquities dealer named Eugene Bobon, who had a well-documented history of selling forgeries. Both the British Museum and the Smithsonian now acknowledge their skulls are 19th century European creations. They still display them, but the labels have been substantially updated. 32. In 1936, a man found a corroded brass plate near San Francisco Bay that bore an inscription claiming to be from Sir Francis Drake himself, placed during his 1579 voyage along the California coast. Historians at the University of California, Berkeley, examined it and declared it authentic. It was a major discovery, physical proof of Drake's landing in California. The plate was displayed at the Bancroft Library at Berkeley for decades and became one of the most celebrated historical artifacts in the state. Then, in the 1970s, more sophisticated metallurgical tests showed that the brass was rolled metal, a manufacturing process that did not exist in the 16th century. The plate was a modern creation. But here is the truly hilarious part. The plate had been made as a prank by members of E Clampus Vetus, a fraternal organization known for historical jokes and elaborate gags. They had made the plate and planted it, expecting their friend, a fellow member, to find it and get the joke. Instead, it ended up in the hands of actual historians who took it completely seriously. The pranksters tried to tell people it was a joke, but by then, the academic establishment had invested so much credibility in the plate that nobody wanted to listen. 33. In the National Archaeological Museum in Athens sits one of the most iconic artifacts in the world. The Mask of Agamemnon, a golden funeral mask discovered by the legendary archaeologist Heinrich Schliemann at Mycenae in 1876. Schliemann famously telegrammed the king of Greece, declaring, "I have gazed upon the face of Agamemnon." The mask became the single most recognized symbol of ancient Mycenaean civilization. But here is the thing about Schliemann. He was a brilliant self-promoter and a documented liar. He fabricated diary entries, exaggerated discoveries, and had a long history of embellishing the truth. The mask he found is noticeably different from the other 4 masks discovered in the same grave circle. It has a much more detailed and lifelike design, including something the other masks lack: a very prominent, well-groomed handlebar mustache. Many scholars have pointed out that this style of facial hair looks suspiciously like the mustaches fashionable in 19th century Europe, not ancient Greece. Some experts believe Schliemann either heavily modified an existing mask or had one made entirely. The museum in Athens still displays it as genuine, but the mask's fancy mustache remains one of archaeology's most suspicious fashion statements. 33 lies behind glass, and those are just the ones we got caught. Now I need you to do something for me. Drop in the comments the fakest-looking artifact you have ever personally seen in a museum, because I guarantee some of you have stood in front of something, thought, "There is no way this is real," and just kept walking. Tell me what it was and where, because the next great museum scandal might literally be sitting in your comment right now. Hit like if this video made you trust museums a little less today, and subscribe because we are just getting started.